My brother thought he could bury the truth with our father. According to him, there was no will, no documents, no attorney, just verbal wishes that somehow left him in control of everything. The house? His. The savings account? His. Our father's classic car that he promised me when I was 16? Also his. And me? I was supposed to accept it and move on. Because according to my brother, that's what Dad wanted. For a while, I almost believed him. Grief has a way of wearing you down. It makes you tired enough to let things slide, especially when it's your own brother, looking you in the eye, insisting there was never a will. But there was one problem with his story. Our father was meticulous about paperwork. He kept receipts from 15 years ago. He filed warranties for things that cost less than $20. This was a man who made detailed spreadsheets for family vacations, and I was supposed to believe he simply forgot to write a will? No, that didn't make sense. So I did what I should have done from the beginning. I stopped grieving like a helpless daughter, and started thinking like someone who wanted the truth and justice. I went back through old emails. I contacted relatives my brother assumed I'd never call. I searched every folder, every safe, every strange little hiding place in our father's home. And then, because karma has excellent timing, my brother made one small, catastrophic mistake. A single envelope, filed in the wrong place. With a name on it he never expected anyone to notice. Inside that envelope was the very thing he'd been hiding for years, our father's real will, and that's when this stopped being a sad story about loss and became something very different, something calm, something calculated, something deeply satisfying. Let me tell you exactly how my brother hid the will, how I exposed him at the reading, and how the law took back everything he tried to steal. Before my father got sick, my brother liked to pretend he was the responsible one in the family. If you looked from the outside, you might have even believed him. He was the one who showed up in a pressed shirt. He knew the names of Dad's doctors. He kept a notebook with dates, appointments, medications. Meanwhile, I was the one my relatives labeled as too emotional. I lived a little farther away. I visited on weekends instead of every single day. I cried openly when my father's health started to fail, and my brother didn't. People looked at him and saw strength. They looked at me and saw weakness. They had no idea how carefully he cultivated that image. When we were kids, it was always the same pattern. If there was group work, he took the credit. If there was trouble, he quietly made sure someone else got the blame. My parents used to say, "Your brother is just more mature. You should learn from him." I did learn from him. I learned that he cared a lot more about control than he did about family. As my father got older, that never changed. It just got more professional. It started small. My brother offered to help with online banking because, as he put it, Dad doesn't really understand this stuff. Then he volunteered to go with Dad to just one meeting with the financial advisor. After that, it was, "Don't worry, I'll handle the paperwork. You know Dad, he hates reading all this legal stuff." He even convinced Dad to sign some documents to make things easier. I didn't realize it then, but those forms gave him official access to Dad's finances, power of attorney, joint accounts. You name it. At the time, I barely noticed. I thought it was just more help. At first, I didn't think much of it. My father was in his late 70s. Technology frustrated him. If my brother wanted to help, fine. They lived in the same city. It made sense. But little details started to bother me. When I asked Dad about money or bills, he always said the same thing. "Your brother's taking care of it. He's good with numbers." When I asked my brother about it, his answer was slightly different. Don't stress Dad with questions. He gets confused. I've got it under control. That phrase kept coming up, over and over. I've got it under control. Control. That was the key word. Then came the first real red flag. One afternoon, long before my father passed, we were sitting in his living room. The TV was on, but he wasn't really watching. He was talking about the house, about how hard he'd worked to pay it off, about how he wanted everything to be fair between his children. He looked at me and said, very clearly, I've put it in writing. I don't want any fights when I'm gone. I remember that sentence like it was burned into my memory. I've put it in writing. I asked, in writing? What do you mean, Dad? A will? He smiled a little and said, don't worry. It's taken care of. The lawyer helped me. Your brother knows. Your brother knows. At the time, I thought that meant my brother was just informed, included, trusted. Now I understand it meant something else. My brother had access. Access to the documents. Access to the lawyer. Access to the information I didn't have. As my father's health declined, my brother took advantage of that gap. He started answering my father's phone for him when I called. He forgot to tell me about certain doctor appointments. And when I asked if Dad needed anything, the answer was always, no, everything's fine. He's tired. Don't make him talk too much. When the hospital visits became more frequent, my brother positioned himself as gatekeeper. He was the one talking to the doctors. He was the one filling out forms. He was the one standing between me and any serious conversation about the future. One day, I pulled him aside in the hallway outside Dad's room and asked directly, does Dad have a will? He didn't even hesitate. He rolled his eyes a little and said, stop being dramatic. There's nothing to fight over. If there was a will, don't you think I'd tell you? You're making this harder than it needs to be. His tone made me feel childish, greedy, like I was somehow the problem for even asking. I remember going home that night, replaying his words. Stop being dramatic. If there was a will, don't you think I'd tell you? A good brother might have sounded annoyed. A guilty brother sounded rehearsed. Still, grief has a way of silencing your instincts. My father was getting worse. I chose to focus on him, and I let my questions go quiet. By the time my father passed, my brother had done something very important. He had carefully positioned himself as the only adult in the room. He had the passwords. He had the folders. He had the relationship with the lawyer. And I had only what people thought of me. The emotional daughter. The one who lived farther away. The one who, in everyone's mind, was less involved. So when my father died, and my brother announced there was no will, Dad didn't want to make things complicated, most people believed him. They saw his calm face. They heard his steady voice. And they assumed that if anyone knew the truth, it would be him. They were wrong. They just didn't know it yet, because the man everyone trusted to handle everything was already hiding the most important document our father ever signed. By the time I found the real will, I wasn't shocked. I was calm. The envelope was tucked in the wrong folder, mixed in with old insurance papers my brother clearly hadn't bothered to read. My name was on the outside, in my father's handwriting. Inside was everything my brother had been pretending didn't exist. A formal will, the lawyer's name, detailed percentages, clear instructions. My father hadn't just put it in writing. He had spelled out, line by line, exactly how he wanted his estate divided. And it was nothing like the story my brother had been telling. My brother was supposed to receive some things, yes. But so was I. Half the house. A share of the savings. The classic car, specifically willed to me for all the years she loved and maintained it. My father even wrote a line that made my chest tighten. I want both of my children to understand that this is fair. I love them equally. There is no favorite. My brother had read that and decided to hide it. He could have destroyed the will, but he didn't. Maybe some part of him was too proud to tear up our father's final words, or maybe he kept it as a financial reference. Sure, I'd never find it. Either way, holding on to that document was his biggest mistake. He was never confused. He was never just doing what Dad wanted. He was stealing. Once I understood that, the grief turned into something sharper. Not rage, not screaming anger, just a very clear, very focused need for justice. So I called the number on the will. The lawyer remembered my father immediately. He confirmed the will was real, valid, and still in effect. He had already given my brother a copy months before my father died. He was shocked that I was only reaching out now, because my brother never told him Dad had passed. So, of course, I never heard from the lawyer after the funeral. That was the last piece I needed. I didn't confront my brother right away. There was no point in yelling in a hallway or over the phone. I wanted witnesses. I wanted structure. I wanted him cornered. By the law, he thought he could twist. So I let the lawyer do what lawyers do. We scheduled a formal reading of the will. My brother thought it was his idea. He called me, using that practiced, patient tone. "Look," he said, "I know you're still upset. Why don't we meet with Dad's lawyer just to clear everything up? There's no actual will, but he can explain how the estate works, so you stop worrying." I let a small pause hang in the air. Then I said quietly, "All right, let's do that." The day of the meeting, I arrived a few minutes early. The lawyer's office was exactly what you'd expect. Dark wood, shelves of thick legal books, framed certificates on the wall. I sat in the chair opposite his desk and placed my copy of the will carefully in my bag, hidden but close. When my brother walked in, he looked relaxed, confident, like a man about to be reassured that he'd done everything right. He gave me a quick, tight smile. "Glad you came," he said. "Maybe now you'll stop thinking there's some secret document out there." The lawyer greeted us both, professionally. Then he sat down, folded his hands on the desk, and said, "Thank you for coming. I understand there have been some questions about your father's estate." My brother jumped in immediately. "Yes," he said smoothly. "My sister seems to think there was a will, but Dad never signed anything. He told me himself he didn't want the hassle." The lawyer looked at him for a long, quiet second. Then he turned his gaze to me. "Is that your understanding?" he asked. I kept my voice steady. "My understanding," I said, "is that my father was very clear he put his wishes in writing, and that he worked with an attorney to do it." The lawyer nodded once. "Correct," he said. "He did. With me." The room went very still. I watched the color shift in my brother's face. He didn't speak yet, but his jaw tightened. The lawyer opened a folder on his desk and took out a familiar document. "I have your father's last will and testament right here," he continued. "It is signed, witnessed, and legally binding." My brother found his voice. "There must be some mistake," he said quickly. "If there was a will, why wasn't I told? Why wasn't I—" The lawyer lifted his eyes again. "You were told," he interrupted, his tone still calm. "We met in this office, the three of us, 8 months before your father passed. I explained the contents of the will to both of you." He turned to me. You attended that meeting, correct? I met his eyes and shook my head, slowly. No, I said. I wasn't invited to any meeting. The silence that followed was heavy. The lawyer frowned slightly, then turned back to my brother. Then who? He asked. Did I meet with the day your father signed this? Because it certainly wasn't your sister. My brother's mouth opened, then closed. I don't remember, he stammered. Things were hectic. Dad was sick. Maybe you're mixing things up. Maybe... He didn't finish, because the lawyer reached into the file and pulled out a simple sign-in sheet. 2 signatures. My father's and my brother's. Dated. Time-stamped. And yet, the lawyer said quietly, this is your signature, is it not? My brother looked trapped. He glanced at the paper, then at me. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. The lawyer began to read the will out loud, line by line. My father's wishes, spelled out in calm legal language, half the house to me, half to my brother. Savings divided evenly. The car, explicitly mine. Personal items, sentimental pieces, all meant to be shared with mutual respect. Every sentence was another crack forming in the story my brother had been selling. He tried to interrupt once. This isn't what Dad really wanted, he snapped. He talked to me privately. He changed his mind. He said... The lawyer held up a hand. If your father wished to change his will, he said, he would have done so legally. He did not. This is his final, valid testament. Then he looked at me. If you choose to contest any actions that were taken under the false claim that no will existed, he continued, you have strong legal grounds to do so. That was my moment. I turned, finally, to face my brother fully. I trusted you, I said, my voice low but clear. When you told me there was no will, I believed you. While I was grieving, you stood there and lied to my face. He started to protest, but I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. You didn't just lie to me, I went on. You lied about Dad. You erased his words. You tried to rewrite his last wishes for your own benefit. The lawyer quietly added, and you attempted to execute the estate in direct contradiction of a valid legal document. That can have serious consequences. Consequences. That was the word I had been waiting to hear. My brother's confidence was gone. He looked smaller now, shrinking into the chair. Look, he muttered. We can work this out privately. We don't need lawyers involved. We're family. Family. He remembered that word when it was convenient. I stood up, slowly, and gathered my things. This isn't about revenge, I said. This is about making sure Dad's wishes are honored, exactly the way he wrote them. I glanced at the lawyer. We'll be moving forward, I added. Formally. The lawyer nodded. I'll begin the process today, he said. The assets will be frozen until everything is corrected. Any transfers made under false pretenses will be reviewed and reversed where possible. My brother's head snapped up. Frozen? He repeated. Reversed? You can't do that. Oh, we can, the lawyer replied, his tone still professional. And we will. I walked to the door, then paused. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just looked back at my brother and gave him the only verdict he really deserved. You could have had half, I said. You chose to risk everything, and now you're losing the one thing you cared about most. Control. Then I left him there, alone, in a lawyer's office, surrounded by the paperwork he thought he could bury. That was the day my brother finally understood something my father always knew. You can lie to family. You can manipulate people. You can even hide a will, but you can't hide from the consequences. In the months after that meeting at the lawyer's office, my brother learned a very slow, very inconvenient lesson. Losing isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just paperwork. The first thing that happened was simple. The accounts were frozen. The joint savings he'd been quietly draining. Locked. The emergency transfers he'd made to his personal account. Flagged. Every transaction he thought he'd buried under grief and chaos was suddenly very visible on a clean, organized statement. The lawyer walked me through everything. We didn't rush. We documented. My brother had used my father's illness like a smokescreen. He paid himself reimbursement for gas, caregiving time, and administrative help. He moved money from my father's account into his own, just to keep things simple. He called it convenience. The law called it something else. Slowly, the numbers were pulled apart. Every unnecessary transfer was challenged. Every suspicious withdrawal was examined. Some of the money had to be paid back. Some of his actions were labeled exactly what they were, self-serving and unauthorized. He didn't go to prison. This isn't that kind of story. But he did spend long, uncomfortable months answering questions he never expected to hear. From the lawyer, from the bank, from a judge. And more importantly, he watched something he thought was already his be redistributed according to the one voice he couldn't overwrite. Our fathers. The house was refinanced and legally split. I got my share. The savings were divided. I received my portion. The car, my father's classic, the one he promised me at 16, was signed over into my name. The day I held the title in my hands, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt balanced, not richer, not victorious, just returned to where things should have been all along. My brother, on the other hand, had to adjust to a new reality. The extra cushion he thought he'd secured for himself. Gone. The quiet control he had over every decision. Broken. And the reputation he'd polished for years as the responsible one, the good son, cracked in front of exactly the people whose opinions he cared about most. Relatives who once praised him started asking careful questions. When did you know there was a will? Why didn't you tell your sister? Is it true you said Dad didn't want anything in writing? He never had good answers, just excuses. And excuses don't sound very convincing when there's a legal document and a lawyer sitting across from you. We don't talk much now. People always ask if I miss him, if I wish things had gone differently, if I regret pushing back. The truth is, I regret one thing. I regret giving him so much unearned trust for so long. But standing up for my father's actual wishes, no, I don't regret that for a second. Because this was never about getting more. It was about refusing to let grief turn into a weapon in the hands of someone who cared more about control than about family. My brother wanted everything. He ended up with exactly half. On paper, that sounds fair. But look closer, and you'll see what he really lost. He lost trust. He lost credibility. He lost the luxury of pretending he was the only adult in the room. He could have had the same inheritance, with dignity, with honesty, with a sister who still respected him. Instead, he tried to cheat the system. And the system, the law, the paper trail, the signatures he couldn't erase, quietly, methodically, turned against him. That's the thing about calculated consequences. They don't always show up as dramatic explosions or screaming matches. Sometimes they look like a frozen account, a reversed transfer, an official letter in the mail that says, very plainly, "You're not in charge anymore." Sometimes justice is just Everything finally being put back where it was supposed to be. If you take anything from this story, let it be this. Grief is not a free pass to rewrite reality. Family is not a shield for manipulation. And if someone is willing to hide a will, you're allowed to stop being the peaceful one and start being the precise one. Because in the end, my revenge wasn't yelling or screaming or breaking ties in a dramatic scene. My revenge was simple. I believed my father. I followed the paper. And I let the truth do what it always does. Catch up.